signed twice now. That one.
Yeah.
Excellent. What about later on? Do you still just reach back for those original influences, or do you find other people along the way that inspire your playing style?
Those original things, in a sense, they settle. They go down deep inside somewhere, and I don't think I haven't done anyway in the past, consciously drawn on those kind of early influences. They just surface automatically, but mixed up with whatever else it is. And but in more recent years, because I think it's an age thing, and I think a lot of people reaching middle age come across it, you start to reassess your own past. You want to know, well, here I am now, how did I get here? Because whilst you're travelling, you're not aware of the process of how that's, shifting and becoming something else. And then suddenly you arrive at a certain point in your life and you think, well, I'm now doing this, but how did I get here? And it's almost like the questions you're asking me. You ask those questions and you go back and reinvestigate. And a lot of the things that you liked when you're younger you find aren't particularly good, but some things still have a resonance, So in more recent years, as I say, I've deliberately listened to older things. In fact, I probably listen to more, and this is terrible because I'm always on the website encouraging people to forget the past and go forward. And I'd listen to things mostly at home that were made long before I was born, music from the 20s and 30s, which I don't really know why, but I just like it.
Well, I find that I was telling Wally on the flight over that since starting this guitar company about 5 years ago, I've been connected with a lot of people who are interested in guitar and a lot of fans of yours. And some people, I find a lot of people thinking, oh yeah, Bill Nelson, I remember Bebop Deluxe, but they've been disconnected from that to now. And so I play for them or offer to them, for example, Gleaming Without Lights, the track 4, I can't think of the name, but it's about a 5-minute reminder of every guitar solo I've ever heard you ever do through 2 decades. So it's a good introduction to somebody, to reintroduce them to what you're doing now. Do you have any particular pieces of work that you've done in the past that you would offer to somebody that's lost touch?
It's difficult because it's not that there are no two albums in a similar thing. There are groups of albums that fit into one category. But there are so many categories. I've kind of been hungry to try different things out, and it's very hard to play somebody something and say this is representative of what I do, because it would only be representative of a particular point in time, But for people who like the guitar stuff, I mean, the one that I think I can still stand by is an album called Practically Wired, which is a kind of a homage to all the different guitar things that I've ever done.
Yeah.
And it's an instrumental album. For vocal things, that's difficult. I've made more instrumental albums than vocal in recent years. One I particularly like, and I'm always rabbiting on the site about, is called The Alchemical Adventures of Sailor Bill. But it's not typical of my work generally. It's a bit of out on a limb. But I really find that has something for me that it seems to have hit a pinnacle for me personally in my own standards. Might not be for everybody else, but that's the way I hear it.
I wanted to talk about some of the people you worked with over the years. Like I said, we arrived here on Tuesday morning, and we went over to Chris Spedding's house and did an interview with him. Met Ian Hunter that night, and then John Cooper Clarke the following night, which was a lot of fun. Whom you've worked with, and Chris Spedding.
Yeah.
Last night was the Undertones. You haven't done anything with them, but that was a little detour. Global Village, Holy Ground, Gentle Revolution, Bebop Deluxe, Red Noise, Flock of Seagulls, Gary Newman, Yellow Magic Orchestra, Harold Budd, Roger Eaton, Robert Fripp. On it is a long, long, long list. Were there any highlights that you could reminisce about, or people that you worked with which was an exceptional experience for you?
Well, the Harold Budd thing's always been the best for me. I was a huge fan of Harold's work before I ever met him. And I discovered his music by accident when I was recording the Red Noise album. We were at a studio in London, I think it's called the Townhouse. It was owned by Richard Branson. And I took a break and decided to go into the West End and go to, I think it was Tower Records, it used to be in Piccadilly. And I went to the kind of section that had all the obscure and esoteric records. And I used to buy things on a whim. If the cover looked interesting and the title sounded cool, I'd buy it and see what it was like. And I came across an album called The Pavilion of Dreams by Harold Budd, and I took that back to the studio, and before we started the rest of the session in the afternoon, I got John Leckie just to pop it on the turntable and put it up on the monitors. And I'd never heard Harold before, and we just sat and listened to the entire album. It was just so stunning. And then some years later, a mutual friend introduced us, and it turned out Harold knew of my music because we'd both contributed a track to an album, a cassette-only album at the time, made by a Belgian company called Disc de Crepuscule, which had Joy Division and people on it. And Harold had heard my piece on there as well. And we became really good friends, and I went to New Orleans and worked in Daniel Lanois' studio on an album called By the Dawn's Early Light that Harold composed. And the interesting thing about it was that he'd composed for everybody in the band. There was a band put together for it. B.J. Cole on pedal steel guitar. We had a Chinese viola player, and we had a harpist, American harpist, and Harold on piano, me on guitars. And everybody had a written part, and I don't read or write music. I'm one of these sort of people from that era when we thought that wasn't important. But Harold said, "Oh, I know about that, don't worry. I'll just nod to you when I want you to start. Play as long as you want, and when you've done, just nod back and we'll pick it up from there." You know? So we sat round in Daniel Lanois' studio in New Orleans, which was it was called Kingsway because it's a beautiful old mansion in the French Quarter, and a massive hall with a big Gothic staircase going up. And at night they wouldn't use electric lights. Everything was candlelit, and there were voodoo dolls and Day of the Dead dolls everywhere, and it had this really spooky Addams Family kind of atmosphere. And we sat around in a circle and played these pieces by candlelight. And there wasn't a separate control room. The way that Daniel had it laid out was that the mixing desk was in the same room as you, and when you were actually playing, the engineer would listen on monitor on headphones rather than through speakers, so there was no feedback to so we were listening to each other in a natural space, you know. And every time I hear that album now, I'm back in that room. It was such a magic time, you know. So that is, for me, it's the best recording experience I've ever had. The most magical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and you did a lot of work with him, so that was...
Yeah.
What about, were there any that you'd rather forget? Which you'll have to tell us about before you forget.
Well, people know, I think, that my time with Gary Newman wasn't the most, you know. Gary's one of these people that sees music as a means to more aeroplanes and women, I think. But not that there's anything wrong with that, but for me it wasn't quite where I was coming from. And, I mean, to put it in perspective, he did an interview after we'd worked together, and somebody said to him, "Oh, you did an album with Bill Nelson?" And he said, "Yeah, the problem with Bill is he thinks music's got something to do with art." So it wasn't an easy relationship.